Hey everyone, and welcome to UK Media Warrior and episode 3 of Star Trek Discovery. Okay, so now we're on to the series proper. We've had a 2-part pilot, which I didn't like, and now we've finally found the Discovery and our main captain and probably the crew we're going to hang around with for all the rest of the series, we can only assume now. Now, this was a really weird way that CBS went about doing this series. They gave us a 2-hour pilot with a different ship, a different crew, a different captain, for no real apparent reason other than just to give us Michael Burnham's character. But myself, and from what I'm seeing online, a lot of people came away from that 2-hour pilot not liking Burnham's character. They preferred Saru, the science officer, and even Michelle Yeoh's captain over Michael Burnham, who just a lot of people just don't like. She's just not a very likable person. So in this one, the 3rd episode, we actually get the ship that the show is named after, and we get Captain Gabriel Lorca, played by Jason Isaacs. Now, before I get into my list, because what I'm going to do is probably with every episode, as I did with the last week's pilot, I make a list as a watcher. I've watched this episode twice. I always watch them twice before I do a review, just to see if I miss things the first time around and to get a proper feel of what I think the show was to me, in my view alone. So I've made a list again, some good points and bad points. Again, unfortunately, mostly bad. But what I noticed when I was watching this is that what I've started to do, and this is weird, is I've started to accept the high-tech ship. Now, last week I was raging about how this is supposed to be set in the prime timeline 10 years before Kirk and Spock, and yet the ship, the tech, the spacesuits, everything looks like in some places it could be more futuristic than even Voyager. Now, when I watched this episode, I was watching it, and yeah, that was still there, and yes, it was still jarring for me as a Star Trek fan to see that, but it wasn't as jarring, and I think I've come up with a reason for that. I'm not watching this as a Star Trek fan, not anymore. There really is no point, because this is obviously a reboot, another reboot. I mean, obviously we've got the original Star Trek shows over the last 50 years or whatever. That's one universe. J.J. Abrams rebooted Star Trek into a new timeline, the Kelvin timeline, with 3 movies. This has to be another reboot. This has to be the Discovery timeline, and I'm not entirely sure how CBS are going to work that into the story, but it has to be a reboot because they're just ignoring all the canon and all the continuity of previous Trek, and they're just doing whatever they want to do to make a sci-fi show. And as a sci-fi show, I actually quite enjoyed this episode. It had some problems, yes, but I think this, out of the 3 episodes that we've seen so far of Discovery, I like this one the best. I don't know why CBS didn't just roll this one out as the pilot in the first place. They could have done that. I mean, it would have made a perfectly serviceable pilot. Why we needed to see the Shenzhou and Michelle Yeoh's character and all those people, I'm not entirely sure. We didn't really need to see the Klingons because the main Klingon died at the end of the last episode, so he was only in it for 2 hours and now he's gone. So there really wasn't much point in that. So really you could ignore. You could go into this series, starting here, episode 3, and not really be any the worse for wear. They quickly roll over what Burnham did in the previous 2 episodes, how she's a mutineer, all that sort of stuff. So if you hadn't seen the last 2 episodes, you could quite easily pick this up from this point on and not be any the worse. Really, it really wouldn't matter to you one way or another. So, okay, context is for kings, the title of this episode. Things I liked. Jason Isaacs. I've always liked Jason Isaacs, and I was really happy when they announced he was cast as the captain on this ship. Now, obviously, the concept of this show is that we're going to be looking at everything that's going on through the eyes of the first officer, Michael Burnham. Although currently she's not a first officer, currently she has no position on the Discovery whatsoever other than being a technical person, I suppose. She doesn't have a rank as yet, so I'm not entirely sure how. I mean, if next episode, because currently Saru from the Shenzhou, who we saw in the last 2 episodes, currently Saru is the first officer of this ship. He got a promotion. Now, if in the next episode, Gabriel Lorca, the captain of the Discovery, puts Burnham into the first officer role above Saru, that's going to feel really weird and jarring, to me at least. She hasn't deserved it. She's a war criminal from how these people are treating her. So for him to just take her on board, ignore the fact that she should be in prison, make her a part of his crew, okay, it's a stretch, but fair enough. But then to make her the first officer when the rest of the crew hate her, that just won't feel right. But we haven't seen the next episode, so we don't know how that's going to go down. But I'm just saying from my point of view. But anyway, Jason Isaacs, I liked him in this. I think he was really good. I think he was the best character in this episode, bar none. Once again, Michael Burnham as a character just fell short. She's just a stereotypical sort of Starfleet officer with an issue. She's like a Tom Paris or an Ensign Rowe. It's weird. They keep trying to inject depth into this character. Oh, Amanda is her adopted mother. She's Spock's half-sister. She's gone through the Science Academy. She knows Sarek. All this. Well, great. But I'm still not getting her. I still don't feel any emotion towards her, any connectivity towards this character at all. I just don't care about her. She annoys me more than anything. So I don't know what's going on with that. But like I say, overall, I liked this episode. It was the best out of the 3 so far. I just decided to watch this as a sci-fi show now because as a Star Trek fan, I would hate it. So I've just tried to put that on the back burner, and I'm just going to watch it as a sci-fi show. And as a sci-fi show, it was serviceable. It was okay. There are better sci-fi shows out there. The Expanse at the moment on Netflix is fantastic, and I would put that way above this as a sci-fi show. But it's the only way I can watch this without getting myself so mad at the fact that CBS are ignoring all the continuity in the canon of the previous Star Trek seasons and shows. But okay, let's run down a few things I liked and a few things I didn't like about this episode. Now, there's going to be a few points here where I'm talking about tech that shouldn't be in this timeline. It shouldn't be on the show because it literally shouldn't be in this timeline. The original series hasn't got this technology, and so if it hasn't, and that's 10 years in the future from this show shouldn't have it either. Number one, the hangar bay has an environmental shield across the door to keep the air in, so shuttles can just go to fly out through the field without having to depressurize the bay. No. In Star Trek the original series, whenever we see a shuttle land or take off, there's always announced that the shuttle bay is depressurizing, the clam doors slide open, and the shuttle launches. That's established. On every Starfleet vessel we see in the original series, the shuttle bay has to depressurize. It doesn't have that protective force field. That only appears in the Next Generation. So that shouldn't be on this ship, on this show. There's a scene towards the end where the captain, Gabriel Lorca, takes Burnham to the engineering section from his office, and he uses a site-to-site transport. Now, that is an established procedure in the Next Generation, but it's declared in the Next Generation that it's a dicey maneuver. You don't really want to transport within a ship because the sensors aren't really calibrated that finely. They normally transport you from a ship to another ship where there might be another transporter bay to lock onto, or they'll transport you to the planet, something like that. But transporting you between decks, it's established at the beginning of the Next Generation is a dicey and tricky maneuver, and you really shouldn't try and do it unless you really, really have to. Now here he just says computer, 2 to transport, to engineering, site to site transport. Bang, done. Okay. Okay, once in engineering, he puts Burnham in this chamber and then floods it with these microbe things that we saw throughout this episode. And he explains that they're experimenting to make these things a new form of travel, new form of engine, so that they can literally go anywhere in the universe in the blink of an eye. In which case they could easily defeat the Klingons, because they can just transport starships wherever they want in the Klingon Empire, blow shit up, and then transport right back out again. So that's how he explains it. That's the big experiment that they're conducting on this ship, and what they were conducting on the USS Glenn, which is the other ship in this show that we see that's now a derelict because the experiment went wrong. But while he has Burnham in the chamber, he says, as he's speaking, Burnham's seeing images of different planets. She sees Romulus, although how they would know what Romulus looks like, I'm not entirely sure. Nobody's been there. And many other planets. As he's talking, he's going like, blink, you can be here, blink, you can be there, blink, you can be somewhere else. And she's seeing all these different things. Now, it could be that the chamber walls are just acting like a view screen. I don't know. If it's holographic technology, it shouldn't be that advanced yet. I mentioned that in the last review. They haven't got holographic display screens. They shouldn't have them yet. They're not that advanced, or they shouldn't be. Equally, I mean, was he saying that he can transport her to all these other planets and that's what he did? But no, I don't think that was obviously the case, because they're still experimenting with this stuff and that wouldn't be possible. So I'm guessing it's just a holographic imagery that he was showing all these different planets. But as I said, that shouldn't be possible yet. Also, another thing to take into account is we know that this technology, these new engines, this new propulsion, this way of moving around the universe isn't going to work. We know that because if it did, we would already see it in the Next Generation, in the original series, the Next Generation, DS9 and Voyager, and none of them use this technology. So they've opened up this series by saying, yes, our big experiment, our undercover top secret experiment to win the war is to create these engines that will allow us to do this. And yet we know they didn't. We know they failed. So why would they make the big experiment to be this new engine that's going to win the war, when anyone who's even slightly a Star Trek fan knows that those engines don't exist anywhere else in Star Trek history? It sort of takes the part of the thrill out of it. We know these experiments are going to fail, so we really don't give a shit about them. It's just an odd way of doing it. They could have put anything into here, a new weapon, biological warfare. They could have done anything that would have still fit in with the canon timeline and continuity. Instead, they went with more modern tech again that we know doesn't exist. Okay, tech aside, there are a few other little things that I want to mention. First off, one of the characters is a cadet, Sylvia Tilly. She's a cadet in the final year at the academy. She's been pulled out of the academy and assigned to this ship. God, is she annoying. I made a point in the last review about how all the officers on that Starfleet vessel looked like they were scared youngsters. That, they were deer in the headlights throughout most of the show, most of the episode. That shouldn't be the case. These are all Starfleet officers. They've been through Starfleet Academy. They should be trained. They should be ready for this. They shouldn't be looking scared and nervous and anything like that. These people go through 4 to 5 years at the academy to make sure they're not that. So I don't understand why this show has got them all looking nervous whenever something happens, all like, run away, or my God, that should be happening. And it just, ugh. And Sylvia Tilly is just so full of buoyant energy that just doesn't go with this show's feeling. At the moment, this show's dramatic, it's dark, it's big things are happening, there's a war going on. This episode in particular was almost like a horror story in places, and you get this new character that's introduced who's going to be a main character by the look of it, and she's just all bubbly and bouncy and everything, and she even gets assigned to an away team mission, an important away team mission. She's a cadet. I don't care how smart she is. Why would you put a cadet onto an away mission to a derelict spaceship? You don't know what the hell's gone on there. That just doesn't make sense. You've got 300 people on board this ship. Some of them must be more trained and more knowledgeable about what they're doing than this stupid young girl who just doesn't seem to know what the hell's going on. Just to make it worse, they introduce Lieutenant Paul Stamets. Paul Stamets, I think that's his name. Lieutenant Stamets, anyway, who's in charge of the experiments down in engineering. Now, but Stamets is just a dick throughout this entire episode. Is just, we don't like him. He's just an idiot. And I don't know whether they put him and Cadet Tilly in it just to make us like Burnham more, maybe? Well, I can't think of any other reason why they would put these two annoying characters introduced in the same episode when people are saying that they don't really like Burnham, and now you've got these other two annoying characters, so perhaps they're more annoying than Burnham, so you start to like her more? I don't know. It's a workable theory. Throughout this episode, everyone keeps accusing Burnham of starting the war. They call her a mutineer, which is fair enough, she is. And they also say, you started the war, because of you I lost friends on this ship at the Binary Star, back of the Binary Stars. You started the war, you're to blame. No. She did these people actually watch the last two episodes? Do they know their recent history? Burnham didn't start the war with the Klingons. The Klingons were looking for a war, they started it. If you actually watch the last two episodes, the 2-hour pilot last week, she actually didn't do anything that started the war. The Klingons shot first. And they shot first because they wanted to. They weren't provoked. Starfleet turned up, the Klingons turned up, they were facing each other off. Starfleet was saying, hi, we come in peace, we want to talk to you. And what do the Klingons do? They shoot. They start the war. They attack the Federation. Now, if Burnham had had her way, she would have fired first, and then perhaps everyone else bleating on about, oh, you started the war, would have some basis in fact. But as it was, we know that she didn't shoot first, she was put in the brig, so nothing she actually did constituted to starting this war. So that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. This episode, third episode in, is the first time we see a red shirt die, although obviously they're not wearing red shirts in this series yet, but he's a security officer and he just dies as they're being chased down the corridors by this beast on the USS Glenn. So the first red shirt death. Well done, that man. There was a big thing CBS was on about diversity in this show. They wanted to show that there was lots of different, every human race was shown on this show, and to make that even better, they had tons of aliens. And they have, and to me, I don't understand why they need it. I mean, this show, again, I think we see 3 or 4 new aliens on the Discovery that we've never seen before in any Star Trek show. Why do you have to have these new aliens? We've already had tons of aliens. From the last 50 years or whatever of Star Trek, we have tons of aliens they could have picked from to put on this show. Instead, they're introducing new types, which we never see again in any of the future like the original series, the Next Generation, DS9, Voyager. We never see these aliens again. So why introduce them here? What's the point? There is no point other than to give the audience more visual spectacle, which is, I think, 50% of what CBS want these shows to be. Just look great. Give the audience something to look at and go, ooh. Other than that, the rest of it, there's not much else to it. There's not much good. It's not very good writing. It's not very good acting in places. So these shows just seem to be all about visual spectacle. Talking about the creature that killed the red shirt, when we first see it in the corridor, it fills up about half of the corridor, a normal big, wide, tall corridor on a spaceship. It fills up about half of it, and it's chasing them through the ship, and eventually Burnham manages to get it to follow her into a Jeffries tube, which she then has to crawl through. How did this huge, wide monster that was filling up half of the corridor fit into a small Jeffries tube that Burnham has to crawl through without blowing out the walls? That just, I mean, the second I saw it, there's no way it's going to fit in there. It's just impossible. It's like half of its size. That hole is half of its size. And in the next few shots, we see Burnham rapidly crawling away from this monster that's chased them through the tube. It's like, it wouldn't fit in there. The point where Burnham's talking to Captain Lorca when he's trying to convince her to work for him on the Discovery. And she makes this big speech about how she, no matter what people might think of her, she's always lived by the principles of the Federation, and that always comes first. And yet, in the last episode, she betrays her captain, she mutinies and tries to start a war with Klingons. The two don't really go together. You can't have your lead character being portrayed as reckless and a mutineer in one episode, and then in the next episode have her making this big grandiose speech about I live my life by the principles of the Federation, when you've obviously seen in the previous episode that she does not do that. She does the exact opposite of that. Not only do they meet some weird creature on the Glen, they also come across dead Klingons that have been ripped to pieces, and one live Klingon who walks into the corridor, tells them to shush, and then gets eaten or attacked by the creature. What? I can't. All right, how did the Klingons get there? Okay, they say the Glen was close to the Federation Klingon border. Somebody says, well, why were they performing experiments this close to the border? And Gabriel Lorca says, well, it's war, and we're trying to win the war. No, that doesn't make sense. The experiment is to make a faster ship, to make a new propulsion system. You could do that anywhere in the Federation. You don't have to be doing that right next to the Klingon border. You could do that on the other side of the Federation, well away from the Klingons, in total safety. That aside, there are Klingons on this ship. How did they get there? There's no Klingon ship around the Glen when the shuttle arrives. The Glen's just floating in space as a derrick. There's no other Klingon vessels around it. They don't know the Klingons are even there until they get on board and they start finding Klingon dead bodies. So where's the Klingon ship? If the whole Klingon crew transported to the Discovery to try and find out what was going on, and they all died, the ship would be outside the Glen. Sorry, if they all transported to the Glen, then their ship would still be floating next to the Glen outside, and the shuttle would have seen it. Okay, that obviously wasn't the case. So a Klingon boarding party goes over, and they get killed. The Klingons then just run away. They're right next to a Federation starship, which is almost 100% intact, and one of the most recent designs of Starfleet vessel. They're in a war with Starfleet. They're going to want this ship badly. So even if their landing party, their away team, gets killed, they can still lock a tractor beam on that ship and put it into Klingon territory to take it apart and find out all Starfleet's secrets. They wouldn't just run away. They're Klingons. If nothing else, they're a warrior race. They would send more landing parties aboard the Glen to try and find out what the hell happened to their people and to kill whatever it was that destroyed them. That's how Klingons work. But even if they didn't do that, they would still take the ship and take it with them when they ran. They wouldn't just leave it. And finally, in the captain's lab, I think we're going to have to call it, we see in the background what looks like a Gorn skeleton. Now, it's a little bit tricky. The Gorns, according to canon and continuity, Captain Kirk is the first Federation person, Starfleet person, to ever see a Gorn. In the original series episode Arena, he gets marooned on a planet with a Gorn and they have to fight each other. He's the first person to ever see a Gorn. That's established. Big time in that episode. Nobody has ever seen a Gorn before. And yet there is a skeleton of a Gorn in Gabriel Lorca's lab. Now, the question is, do they know that that's a Gorn skeleton? Because they could have just found this skeleton somewhere. They don't know what it is, and as Gabriel Lorca seems to have these skeletons of many creatures in his lab, perhaps he just got his hands on it and brought it aboard ship as a curiosity. They might not know it's a Gorn skeleton. That's a possibility. That it might not even come into play at all. I mean, it might just be background scenery. But for them to put a Gorn skeleton, an obviously Gorn skeleton, as background scenery is going to make fans ask questions. So why do it? If it's just a throwaway decoration, why do it? Why drop this thing in there that's going to have everyone say, well, why is there a Gorn? Yeah, they can't. CBS already had problems with the Star Trek fan community hating this show because it's not following continuity or canon at all. And dropping a Gorn skeleton is just making it look like you care even less about previous Star Trek episodes and series, even though you keep telling everyone that this show takes place during that timeline. So why have a Gorn skeleton? Okay, that's about it. That's my list of things I liked, not many I admit, and things I didn't like, obviously a slightly longer list. But as I said, out of the 3 episodes, I like this one the best. I'm hoping it's going to get better. They're obviously, as I said, they're obviously ignoring all continuity and all canon now. So when I watch these, I try and turn off my Star Trek fan brain and just try and watch it as a sci-fi show. And I'm finding that if I do that, then I can enjoy it to a degree. It's only after I've watched it that I turn my Star Trek fan brain back on and it goes, I shouldn't have done that. That shouldn't be there. That shouldn't be here. Which just shows, like I keep saying, that CBS don't give a shit about canon at all. But anyway, out of the 3, I like this one the best. Jason Isaacs is fantastic. I'm going to love him. I sort of wish he was the main character. That would be more interesting for me than Michael Burnham, who I don't give a shit about. But yeah, so that's it for this one. Context is for Kings. 3rd episode, 4th one next week. Actually quite looking forward to seeing what they do with it now. So I'll see you then for my review. Until then, you guys take care. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this review, please subscribe to my YouTube channel or perhaps share this on your Facebook. But until next week, you guys take care. See you then.